Hello and welcome to another episode of Exploring Standards. I'm your host, Jess, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Sarah Smith. Sarah is a consultant of ours, and she is a consultant for ISO 13485 medical devices, ISO 9001 quality management, and she's also a certified data protection officer, and she has 10 years of experience in the medical device industry. Sarah, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Very, very well. So our topic today for our podcast is ISO 13485 medical devices. But before we get into that, as always, I like to ask my guests to introduce themselves. So Sarah, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. So a little bit about myself. So I'm Sarah. I'm from Derby. If I go years and years back, I actually started out my career in the pesticide research industry in regulatory roles, and that's how I got into medical devices. So I was lured away into the medical device world. I did a mixture of quality management and regulatory roles, and I've worked with wound care products, disinfectants, but a lot of my experience is in digital health. So I've worked with a lot of software as a medical device, but also non-medical device software products, which has opened up other areas for me, like the data protection side of things and other digital health specific standards. So things that I'm quite passionate about. I'm very passionate about translating requirements, regulations and standards into plain English because, one, it helps me for a start, but I think it also helps the people you're working with. You know, not using that regulatory jargon always helps people sort of understand what they're doing and bringing them along for the ride.
I love that. I think you're right. In this industry, there is just so much jargon. And then I can't imagine checking on there with the medical side as well, how much extra jargon there must come on with that. Like, I know ISO is pretty bad, so that must be like just a whole new world. So I'd love that. That's fantastic. So then, can you please give our listeners a brief overview of 13485?
So ISO 13485, it's a quality management framework for medical device manufacturers. It gives provision for continuous improvement. It facilitates adherence to specific medical device regulations, and ultimately it facilitates that safe and effective delivery of medical devices. It's similar to ISO 9001, but it is more specific to the medical device industry.
Okay, it's good to know that. So why is it important then?
So it's important because it gives organisations who manufacture medical devices a structure and a streamlined approach to quality. It emphasises the need to take a risk-based approach to your quality management system. So when you're designing products and processes, an organisation can take into account the context of their organisation and make sure that they are taking a risk-based approach to designing products and developing processes and making sure those processes concentrate on the highest risk areas first.
I can imagine that's quite important as well in medical.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like a golden thread that runs through the whole design and development process.
Yeah. Okay, so what are the key components of the ISO 13485 QMS?
So the structure aligns with other management frameworks as well, such as 9001 and 14001, in the sense that the key components are your documentation systems that you have in place, management responsibility, infrastructure, so making sure you have the right tools, the right people to carry out the roles that are required for the QMS. There are divergences in the 13485 standard to other standards because it's specific to the medical device industry. So it looks a lot at product realization quite heavily, and that is your design and development and realization process, but also looks at areas within that process, such as making sure you're capturing your customer requirements, your regulatory requirements, making sure that when you're sourcing components for your medical devices that you're again, taking a risk-based approach to that process, because making sure that, for example, you're sourcing components from a supplier where you've got those controls in place to make sure those components aren't going to change and have an impact on your end device. In terms of similar to other standards as well, it has an important component for monitoring and measurement and analysis, so internal audits, corrective and preventative actions. So there is a lot of alignment there with other standards, but there is also that divergence specific to medical devices.
Okay, that's really good to know. Thank you so much for that clarification. How does risk management play a role in ISO 13485?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a risk-based standard, so it plays a huge part. So certainly through the product realization process, it's a golden thread that runs through that process. So when you're developing your products, risk management plays a part iteratively throughout that process, but also for your quality management processes itself. So it all comes down to context of organization, context of product. So if you're assessing the risk of a process or product, you determine the risk level based on the context of your organization.
Okay, thank you. So what is the difference between ISO 13485 and GMP?
Yeah, so first of all, GMP is good manufacturing practice. So it goes beyond medical devices. It's also the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry. The differences between the two is ISO 13485 is a voluntary standard. However, having said that, it is often a prerequisite to be able to enter into certain markets. GMP is required by regulation. Certainly in the US, medical devices, GMP is a requirement. The two have similarities in the sense of documentation requirements. So both standards have requirements for SOPs, design history records, batch files, that type of thing. Another difference between the two is that 13485 is audited by certification bodies, but GMP is audited by regulators.
I think it's very interesting that you say that 13485 is often a prerequisite to get into the industry and to get, because that's something that we find not just with 13485 obviously, but like all standards, is that although they're never compulsory, it always helps with tenders, and that's what a lot of our clients come to us for, is that, we need this tender and they want this ISO standard. So it's, this kind of theme runs through in every standard.
Exactly, yeah.
So our final question then, are there any regulations in the UK or Europe that ISO 13485 help with?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, as I mentioned, it is a prerequisite into markets anyway, but certainly for both the UK and the EU, having a quality system in place and those quality system elements form part of the conformity assessment route as part of the product accreditation and registration. So having a 13485 QMS in place will tick those boxes that you need to be able to meet those requirements as part of the conformity assessment route.
That's good to know. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Sarah, for joining me on today's episode. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here.
No, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
That's fabulous. Thank you. And thank you for listening to today's episode of the podcast. If you have enjoyed it, please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the podcast. And I'll be back with an episode in a couple of weeks.